Got it. So thanks for coming out. Again, as I was saying, hi Stacy. So local bookstore over here. So not a lot of locally owned, not a lot of locally operated bookstores anymore, right, everyone? So later, show some love to Stacy and the local bookstore. Plus, all proceeds from my books go to my kids' college tuition. It's true. So I send you 2 kids to a private that our motto should be "Thank God for Mississippi," right? Otherwise, we would get it. Anyways, apologies. I was telling folks I was right behind a multi-car accident in Boca. I left an hour early so I could sit and hang out. And then when I got on Lyons in Boca, which is about 10 miles up Lyons, I went 10 miles an hour the whole way. There was a tractor that cuts grass, and it wouldn't get off the road. Nobody would pass it. So here we are. Thanks for waiting. So thanks to Katrina, one of the library administrators, for organizing this. Doug Crane, you're a longtime director of libraries for Palm Beach County, who does a remarkable job. Thank you to him. Thanks to all of you for coming out and supporting your local library, right? And supporting books and authors. If I hear one more politician, without mentioning names, say that we don't need libraries anymore, my head's going to explode. If I hear one more politician calling for book bans, my head's going to explode. You all know Florida now leads the nation at book bans. We passed Texas. We're about at 1,000, which means we're even almost with Nazi Germany in the 1930s in book bans. So thank you for supporting books, supporting authors, supporting writing. I love libraries. I love books. I'm happy to admit it. I'm nerdy. I love books. I found a way of making a living writing books. I can't believe it. So it's not work for me. It's pleasure. So what I thought I'd do today is talk a little bit about how do you write a book. Talk about how do you get a publisher. Give you some fun stories of a couple of books that I wrote. Some cool twists and turns in the process of researching and discovering things. It's like Indiana Jones stuff. It's really cool. Really cool. And don't think I didn't show my kids Indiana Jones like 10 times, so they would connect that professors are very cool. So they got, yeah. They're like, Dad, professors. I'm like, yeah, you know. Anyway, so that's what I thought we'd do today. Then at the close, I'm happy to take questions on whatever you'd like to talk about. Sound good?
Yes.
Okay, and I'll stay late since I got a late arrival. If you need to leave, go ahead and go. If you want to hang out, I'll stay as long as the library will have me. Okay? All right. So, first off, getting started. Has anybody here ever written a book?
You did.
Okay, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, great. Anybody here want to write a book? What? Okay, I'll see y'all later. I'll bring you baking recipes or something. Come on. Anyways, writing books is fun. It's a lot easier to do than I think people realize. So oftentimes at these book festivals and literary fairs, I do a program on how to write a book, where I do a deep dive on all the ins and outs. I'm not going to do that today. I also do that occasionally at academic conferences, but I'm not going to do that today. But I always have people that come up and say, gee, it's not as difficult as we thought. So first off, ideas and a topic. You want to find something you're really interested in, right? Could you imagine spending years researching and writing something you don't like, right? I think that's called marriage, right? So that's my ex. That's my ex. So you find something. Okay, good. I have their attention, Stacy. So find something you love. My passion is history. I absolutely love history. When I was younger, when I was in college, I remember I went to a big school, Virginia Tech, and I went in to see I stayed for 5 years because I had a double major. I played 2 varsity sports, and I think I was the president of every club on campus, so it took me a while. Plus, I'm a little slow. I went to see my academic advisor, and I remember this clearly. He said to me, what are you going to do? And I go, I don't know. He goes, that's the wrong answer. He goes, come back tomorrow and tell me what you're going to do. So I went home that night and made a list of about 30 jobs I'd like to have. I wanted to be an archaeologist, wanted to be a paleontologist, wanted to be an anthropologist, I wanted to be a human rights attorney, I wanted to be an advocate for women's rights. I wanted to work for Greenpeace. I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to work for a politician. I wanted to be a diplomat. I wanted to work at a museum or an historical site. I wanted to be a librarian. I wanted to be and I made this big list. And I brought it in and gave it to him. He goes, this is not the right answer. He said, come back at the end of the week and tell me what job you want to have. And he was very dismissive. And I remember I went back and I looked at my list and I thought, how do I pick one of these? I mean, if I'm an anthropologist, I can't be an archaeologist or human rights lawyer or a wildlife biologist. I want to do all that. So I did one of the few smart things I've ever done in my life. Instead of picking a job, I envisioned myself when I was super duper old, about 30 to 35. You know, you're 21, that's ancient, right? So anyways, I thought, when I'm really, really old, like 30, 35, what do I want to do? And I wrote out my ideal day. And I thought, I'd like to get paid to go to battlefields and museums and design the exhibits and set up the cannons and train the staff. I thought, you know, somebody gets paid to do that. And I thought, you know what? I'd like to travel around the world on cruise ships, talking about history and cultures and eating like crazy and drinking myself silly. Somebody gets paid to do that, right? Gopher on Love Boat got paid to do that, right? Although he didn't do lectures. So I thought, okay, that's a cool job. Then I thought, I would like to be an advocate for progressive causes, for rights, and I'd like to go on the news and bitch every time there's a violation of it. But if I'm a lawyer or I work as a doctor or if I'm in a corporation, they'll fire me. And I thought, how can I do all that? You know, I'd also like to write books. Then I went, a professor. Nobody fires professors, right? Unless if you're in Florida and you say DEI. So let me say it again, DEI. There we go. DEI, okay, right? Unless if you say critical race theory, or if you want to teach the Holocaust, the witness history, shy of that. So I thought, if I'm a professor, I could debate, I could argue, I could go on TV, I could lead rallies, I could march. And professors, it's not a real job, so I get much of the year off, right? So I go to museums and battlefields and go on cruises. And so I went back in, I remember, to see my advisor, and I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a professor, so I'm going to go to battlefields, I'm going to go on cruises, I'm going to fight the good fight, and I'm going to not get fired. And I remember he dropped the F-bomb and told me to get out of his office. So I said, okay, I'm reverse engineered. How can I do this when I'm like really old and 35? And I thought, okay, I have to be doing this when I'm 34, this one I'm 33. So I realized I needed to write a lot of books to get some credibility. So they would hire me at Gettysburg or the Truman Library or wherever they hired me. And if I write a lot of books and I get on TV, maybe the cruise lines would hire me. And if I do all that, maybe the university will leave me, let me go, you know, and travel with them. So I said, okay, I'm going to get a PhD and write a truckload of books. So we've written 49. And now what I do all the time is I go to Gettysburg and the Truman Library, and I put out the cannons and lead tours and train the docents, and we go on cruises, right? Where's my fellow cruisers? I saw Rhonda back there. Rhonda, yeah. We're going to May, right? The end of May, we're going to the south of France. We just got off a holiday cruise in December. We did D-Day last year, right? Which was way cool. Somebody had to do it. So I figured, all right. So anyway, so that's what we do. So books is part of it. So I love history. So I thought I'd write books on history. To me, it's not a job. What I like most about history is the history we don't know. Right. I like the stories behind the stories. What we think we know, but we're completely wrong, right? Like George Washington never cut down the cherry tree. How many people learned that he cut down the cherry tree? Everybody, come on, raise your hand. Stay with me. I'll start over. And we're going to do that. And I asked you to answer, otherwise I'll start over, right? So George Washington, you all learned that story. And the story goes like this. When George was a little boy, his father, Augustine, died around the time this story was set. Augustine had a fruit farm and bought George a hand axe. Today, if you buy a little kid an axe, you get a visit from the Department of Children and Families, and your news at 11, right? And Augustine walks out and finds George with the axe and a cherry tree chopped. So he says to George, quote unquote, George, who killed my cherry tree? And Washington says what? I cannot tell a lie, right? Which makes him a precocious little bugger, doesn't it? If my son cut down a cherry tree, I wouldn't care. If he said father, for I could not tell a line, I'd be worried as hell. So Augustine says to George, that's okay, for in telling me the truth, you've repaid me 100-fold over what that fruit would have done. Now, that never happened. There was a preacher turned bookseller by the name of Parson Mason Locke Weems, W-E-E-M-S, and he wanted to monetize George Washington's death. Could you imagine people wanting to monetize everything? Yes. And Washington died on December 14, 1799, so Weems got in the story to write a book about George. Mm-hmm. And we did, but back then we didn't have the New Canyon Library. We didn't have Amazon.com, thank God. We didn't have, Barnes & Noble. So the only way to sell the books, you loaded them up on a wagon, and not in the winter and summer because of the weather, but in the spring and fall, you went up and down the eastern seaboard. And Weems did, and he lost everything. Nobody bought the book. The book's this thick, no pictures. People are still broke from the revolution. Half the country's illiterate, not unlike today. So he didn't sell his book. So Weems goes back to Philadelphia and says, you know what? I'm going to write the book, make it all up. And he did. And it sold like hotcakes. This is why you have stories of Washington throwing coins across the river, right? When Peyton Manning couldn't. You have stories of Washington throwing coins over mountains, right? And George Washington comes across like Paul Bunyan in those stories. That's the area one? George Washington fell and the Grand Canyon was formed. Washington had to pee, and lo and behold, the Mississippi River was formed. It's ridiculous. So what Weems did on the 5th edition of his book, he wanted a moral vignette, a bedtime story. He wanted an Aesop's Fables story. Remember the little mouse that pulled out the thorn from his paw? He wanted something like that parents could read to kids at bedtime to teach them about morality. So he made up this whole story. So what about a story, right? That telling your kids George Washington never told a lie. And then the kids, like confession, right? So he made that whole thing up. And today we're still teaching our kids about it. And it never happened. So that's the kind of stuff I like. I like to find out what we're doing wrong, what we missed, and then what we're telling the wrong way, right? I remember my son's older than my daughter, and when he was little, kindergarten, first grade, I remember picking them up after school. Y'all remember when the kids were that age, when you pick them up every day, it was like a party. They tell you what they learned, right? And when they turn to a teenager, you can't find out anything. I remember my son comes out, and he's like, Dad, 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 Dad. And I'm like, hop in the car, bud. I'm like, what happened? He goes, you're not going to believe what the teacher said today. Kindergarten, first grade. I'm like, what did they say, bro? He goes, the teacher said Washington cut down the cherry tree. I said, well, what did you say? He said, I told her she was wrong. And I remember writing myself a note, visit the teacher for a parent-teacher meeting. Right? So it's important that we discover what we don't know and what we think we know. And that's even more important today, because today there's a war on the facts, there's a war on the truth, and there's a war on history. He who controls the present controls the past by rewriting our history. And we're doing it. We're putting everything through an ideological lens from people that never had a history class. If you want history, you leave it to the historians. If you need open heart surgery, don't let the guy down the road do it. Don't ask the state senator to do it. Get a surgeon to do it. So we're rewriting history, so that becomes very important for us today. This is the front lines, right? Fighting for history. So that's what I like. Passion, I love doing what I do. Expertise, all of you have some expertise. I should not write a book on dentistry. Because there's 5 husbands and that's all I know, right? I brush my teeth 3 times a day. So find something of expertise on research. When I teach graduate students, I used to teach PhD students at another school, I always told them my rule was do 10 times as much research as you're going to need for your paper, your book, your project, or your test. So one thing I do, I research up, down, in, out, and around. So if I go to give a lecture on Lincoln or Washington or Truman or the War of 1812 or the Spanish-American War, whatever I'm doing, I have 10 times as much material as I need, and I decide what I'm going to do. That way, if someone asks a question, right, you're only as good as your first question, and you can answer that particular question. Plus, when you're doing your research, I always think of every book that I write as a movie. I try to envision it. to make it fun, right? You know, are you like me that you love history, but you hated all your history classes? Didn't you hate all your history books? Because it was rote memorization. It's like they took the people out of the history. I say put the triumphs and tragedies and the loves and the losses. So I would try to envision the battle like a movie. And I made sure I found out what was the weather that day. What did the general eat for breakfast? What did they say about it? You can find a quote from a soldier that described the terror, right? And that's the stuff you lay out so that the reader then can get in the shoes of the people from history, right, everyone? And I remember I was, the very first C-SPAN book TV, I've done 3-4 dozen of them. So years ago, 30-some years ago, I got to do my first book TV. And you guys all like book TV, right? C-SPAN or you wouldn't be here. And so I had been one of the, I think the only people that like it are in this room today, right? I love C-SPAN, I love book TV. And I finally got my opportunity to do my first C-SPAN book talk. I was so excited. And I got up and I gave my talk and it went well, we had a big crowd. And I said, okay, questions. And I asked a little older lady in the front row, she had her hand up. You know, you never call the guy in the back wearing camouflage and a red baseball cap, right? Because they're going to tell you aliens are here and the Earth's flat, you know, and there goes your whole talk. So I called this lady and she says to me, and I remember it like it was yesterday, she says, I really liked your book. And I'm thinking, great, because this is on television, right? And she says, but you know, I think you made the whole thing up. I went, why would you say that? She said, because in this one battle, you described what George Washington had for breakfast before the battle and the weather. And I wrote, oh, thank goodness for asking that. Here's why. Washington wrote it down. Once upon a time, people wrote. People wrote diaries, right? Once upon a time, people knew cursive, right? And, you know, we didn't have the Kravis Theater or the Miami Dolphins. There was nothing to do. So they wrote everything down. And he wrote down how many hogs he slaughtered that day, what he ate for breakfast, what the weather was. And then based on the weather, he said we need to go in for the right because there's a hill and it's raining. And by just putting little tidbits in there, now all of a sudden the reader can kind of smell the wet grass and the fear of the battle and smell the powder that was ignited from the can. You can't tell what's fog and what's gas now, right? And all of a sudden now you're in the battle. So I told her, thank you for asking that, and I explained it to her. Right? And I didn't even kick her. So do a lot of research. Write. Writing is like riding a bike, right? Once you do it, you always know how to do it. The more you do things, the better you get at it. Write. And just sit and journal, everybody. Write the grandkids a letter. Just practice describing things. I remember when I first said I wanted to write books. I wasn't a creative writing major or anything. I sat down, and I remember I just tried to describe a tree without saying a tree. I described the bark, the permanence, the timelessness of it, the root systems anchoring it to the earth, how the leaves would flutter, and as you look up at it, there's the contrast of the sky. I tried to describe a tree. And then I would sit down and try to describe a mountain. I just tried to describe love and hate without using the word. Does that make sense? Just as a way of not saying there's good guys and bad guys, and the good guys won. Who wants to read that? So, write, and that helps to develop your skill. It's fun to write books. You get to go to book festivals. Anybody been to a book festival? Yeah, so Miami has one of the largest book festivals in the country every November. Go ahead down to the MDC campus, and it's fun. There's authors, there's publishers. You can meet the authors. Everybody's talking about books. Everybody's buying books. For me, it's like a group hug, right? And there's book clubs. That's fun. Everybody goes to the book club and wants to read a book and talk about it. C-SPAN's book TV. What's better than that, right? So all of that's fun. The prospectus. I'll make this quick. If you want to write a book, you don't just call the publisher and say, "Hey, publish me." And these days, it's difficult. Virtually every major publishing house will no longer accept unsolicited manuscripts. They won't even open it up. They won't even notify you that they received it. So don't send it. You've got to find an agent or start with a small press or some connection by way of connection. I use a literary agent. So my first 2 books were difficult. Now it's easy because you know people in the business and you can place a call. But you still have to submit a proposal or a prospectus or a praesis. Different ones have different names behind it. You have to have a working title. This title's subject to change, right? I'd say half the books I've written, the publisher changed my title, right? For example, I had a book not long ago on our nation's first pandemic, which was yellow fever, that wiped the country out in 1793. That was the first year of George Washington's second term. We didn't have Washington, D.C. yet. Our capital was Philadelphia, right? Because Washington, D.C. was still being built. New York City was our capital for 1 year, Philadelphia for 9, and they gave George a decade to build the capital. Those of you that saw the musical Hamilton, this was all decided in the room where it happened. Okay, so Philadelphia was the capital. I estimate that 10 to 20% of the population was killed by this disease, which makes it worse than influenza or COVID or AIDS or SARS or avian flu, right? Or all the, and it's not if but when the next disease is going to happen. That's why it's good that we just fired every single disease that we defunded the entire operation, so it doesn't exist anymore. So it was for 100 days they had to evacuate Philadelphia as this disease, unknown at the time. Think of the primitive science and rudimentary medicine in 1793, right? People didn't know what it was. Today we know it was yellow fever, which is caused by a mosquito. In that case, it was probably the most violent strain of mosquitoes, Aedes aegypti, the unwelcome Egyptian in Latin, and it annihilated the population. So it was really scary. So I wanted to call my book 100 Days of Terror, because for 100 days we had to evacuate the capital. People were dying wholesale. They couldn't bury them. It was literally like a Monty Python skit. Bring out your dead in wagons. Medieval. My publisher said, no. The newspapers back then, according to your manuscript, they called it America's First Plague. So we're going to call it America's First Plague, and that's what they called it. So, and I remember telling my publisher, I said, no, that's a good title, because that's what they called it. But I want 100 Days of Terror. And he said to me, Robert, when you're David McCullough, you can make up the title if you want. So come up with a good title. They may change it, right? I wrote a book on the unknown final days of the Holocaust called The Nazi Titanic. It did well for me. It won a couple national awards. It was made into a movie. So Hitler called the ship the Nazi Titanic. Short story, the Nazis made a floating concentration camp. And at the very end of the war, it was sunk with countless thousands of Holocaust survivors on the ship. It would be the single bloodiest hour of the entire Holocaust. History's worst case of friendly fire. It was the last disaster of World War II and the worst maritime disaster in history, all rolled up into one. And it was classified and locked away in the archives in England for decades. So we were lucky to find it. I just wanted to call the book, I called it The Final Voyage. I thought that sounded cool. Yeah. And my literary agent, Peter Bernstein, I remember he called me, he said, Robert, are you dumb? And he goes, the two most fascinating, I'm like, yeah, apparently, tell me why. He said the two most fascinating words in the English language are Nazi and Titanic. And that's what the ship was called. I'm like, oh, so I called it the Nazi Titanic. That's the beauty. So there's a story there. Listen to your editor. Listen to your friends. You may think everything's great that you're doing, but get feedback from folks. An overview, you have to find an overview. What's your book about? A timeline. When are you going to finish this? What's the market like? Who are the competitors? You can't write and say there is no competition for my work. You have to profile the books that are like yours. What's their strengths? What's their weaknesses? How is yours different? What's the contribution you're making to history? Yada, yada, yada. Special features. Do you have a timeline, photos, an index of key terms? You know, I put maps in the back of a lot of my books so the reader can flip to the back and follow the battle on a map. Whatever. Working table of contents, sample chapter, about yourself, and you write in third person about 3 paragraphs. So all that happens in your proposal. Then what they do is they have what's called a double-blind review if you're looking at a big publisher. They take your name off the draft, and they send it out to experts, historians, whatever. So they don't know who they're reading, and you don't know who's reading your book. And then if they get thumbs up from all of them, then the board at the publisher will go through it and then decide if you get a thumbs up. So it's an exhaustive and timely process. And you know how professors are. Remember the first book I submitted, I got these reviews back from professors marked up in red ink, and I'm like, what are they talking about? They don't my ass. They don't understand the genius of this book. And I sat down, I'm like, well, that makes sense. Chapter 3 and 4 should be reversed. I'm like, so, you listen, you pay attention to it, but it's a difficult process. Should you use a literary agent or not? I use a literary agent. They can reach all the big publishers. They know people who know people, right? They're like part of the Sopranos, right? So a literary agent can be very helpful. They help you with the manuscript, with the publisher, with the title, with television, with yada yada, with everything. I was very lucky. This guy, Peter Bernstein, is a big, big dude. I shouldn't have him as my literary agent. I'm swimming above my level. He represented Jimmy Carter, Sonia Sotomayor, the who's who. But his godfather was a member of a synagogue I used to go to, and he really, really liked me. And he says, listen, do you have an agent? I'm like, yeah. He goes, do you want the agent of all agents? I'm like, I can't. I think I'm okay at what I do, but he goes, listen, my godson's like the greatest agent in the country. I'll make a call. After that, Peter calls and says, I'll be your agent. I'm like, okay. The process. You have to pick a publisher. So I use a wide array of publishers. I'm basically using 3 now. I use Hachette, which is the 3rd largest publishing company in the world. I use them because they're the biggest in Europe, and that allows me to get a European market for books in translation. They're big. So Hachette. I also use Georgetown University because it's, elite. And it allows me to have credibility as an historian if Georgetown is using it. The downside of that is when they send my manuscript to the board of professors at Georgetown, OMG, it takes them months and all they do is argue. So what I do is I always save my original draft because eventually they'll tell me to go back to the original, So, and then I use Rowman and Littlefield, which I really like. They're part of Bloomsbury, who I think is the 4th largest publisher. So, but everybody has a different publisher. If you're writing cookbooks or self-help, some publishers are good at that. If you want to write a tabletop, whatever, with photos, some publishers are good at that. I pick ones that are good at history. Contract and clauses, it's fun to get a contract. Get a published author to look over your contract to make sure it's good. First one I got, I'm like, really? This is all the royalties I'm going to make? Then I called around going, can you believe they're screwing me like this? And everybody said, no, that's what you get. No. Like, so there's clauses, there's fun clauses, and about if most of my books are translated, I just had one in Russian, believe it or not, one in Portuguese in Brazil, and one in China. I get an enormous percentage of the royalties, which is good. Where in the US, I get a little teaspoon. There's clauses on optioning. If a Hollywood firm wants your book, they option your book, and you get rights. So I made sure I get rights if they option any of mine into a movie. So if anybody knows Spielberg, give them my address. So call me Steven. So quick funny story on that. Anybody knows Spielberg has a sister named Nancy, who's a hell of a filmmaker? Yeah, she made a great film on the IDF Air Force, which was very well done. And we brought her to South Florida. Our theater at Lynn wasn't big enough, so we went to that huge mega church on Yamato, where they have all the concerts. You know what I talk Spanish? We went to Christian. Yeah, they have like 2,500 seats, so we brought Nancy Spielberg to show her movie, and it was really, really good. So I was excited. So I brought one of my books along with me to give her. Of course. Yeah, of course, because she could make it a movie. And I went backstage, sat in the green room with her, thanked her for coming. She thanked me, and I handed her my book. And I said, here's my business card is in it. I'm sure you get this every day, but I would be remiss if I didn't. But then stupid me, she asked me if I liked her movie. I said, I loved your movie, with one exception. In the movie, you criticized Harry Truman for not providing warplanes. She said he didn't, and I said because he couldn't. Truman went 9 for 10 when David Ben-Gurion, Dr. Chaim Weizmann, and Ambassador Abedin asked Truman to support Israel. He gave them everything, but he couldn't give warplanes because that was part of the deal he made to get the UN to support Israel in 1948. May 14th, 1948 at 6:11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It was part of the deal to get funding from Congress. He couldn't give direct warplanes. So when that stopped, he gets Israel a $100 million loan guarantee. $100 million. I should do this right now. Anybody get the joke? Okay, 3 of you. Come on. Jeez. You know that the Austin Powers, I think. 4 of you. So Truman contacts, Chaim Weizmann and says, listen, I can't get the warplanes. If I do, everything's going to fall apart. He says, we don't want them. We want the $100 million. And then they could buy what? From Czechoslovakia and Romania. They bought stuff from everywhere. So it's the art of what's possible. So I explained that to Miss Spielberg as she turned around and stormed away from me. I'm like, dang, why did I have to say something? But she was wrong on my buddy Harry. I had to tell her. So anyways, you submit your manuscript, blah, 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 copyright. Library of Congress, you have to get permission for every photo, everything. Publicity, blah, 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 blah. And here we are, when you get the book. The important part is the cover. There's my book, America's First Plague. They wanted to put the word plague in the font that they used in newspapers in 1793. So I'm like, that's cool. That's what Americans and newspapers called it, so they wanted to do that. That's an actual old image of a French philanthropist who gave his fortune to help the sick. And he was actually going around the town putting people in carriages, taking them to a hospital he opened up with his own fortune. So that thought that was a good one. The publisher liked it. We got permission. So there's the cover to the book. Don't love it, but I like it. There's an interesting lesson, of course. It's still, people always say, in the worst of times, the best of humanity comes out. I always say the worst of humanity comes out. I mean, history is written in blood. There's never been a culture, a time, a country where we haven't had sexism, racism, murder, anti-Semitism. The treatment of prisoners of war has always been horrible. Humanity, we are a violent, ignorant, horrific species. When you look at our history, it's atrocious. And what happened because of the lack of science and medicine, people that believe in science like today, nobody knew what caused the disease in 1793. So chaos and fear ran amok. So what they did was they said it was immigrants. And they threw out immigrants, rounded up immigrants, created detention centers because it's always the immigrants. Then the disease didn't go away, so they said, no, it's blacks. And they rounded up African Americans, quarantine centers, even though the only folks in the capital city who were brave enough and were willing to bury the dead was the African American community at the AME Church, the first AME church in the country, which was in Philadelphia. And then the disease didn't go away, so they had to blame someone else. They said it was the Jews. So they rounded up Jews, and they called it the synagogue of Satan. It's the Jews. So this is American history. So c'est plus ça change, everybody, right? The more the things change, c'est plus the map shows here we are. So it's always blame-mongering, finger-pointing. So scary. The one on the right, America's First Crisis, you're allowed to laugh. I wrote a book on the War of 1812. Laugh, got to get it out of your system. Yeah. And instead of leading over going, he has a hell of a social life. No wonder he's here on a nice afternoon. He's going to come for this guy. So anyway, that picture on the front, and I wish I could get this bigger or you could buy the book. It's an absolute beautiful painting. There's a painting in London of one of the naval battles from the War of 1812, and it's selling for $2 million or something in London. And of course, I'm not going to buy it. Of course, they're not going to give us the copyright. But I contacted them and said, listen, that's a beautiful rendering. It's accurate. Love the painting. I said, could I use it for the cover of my book? And I'll put a whole blurb about it inside. And they went, sure, for nothing. So we used that. I like the painting. And of course, the exciting thing about the War of 1812 is people still don't know who won some of the battles. Yes. So I was like, I'm going to be the guy that finds out who won those battles. Game on. Isn't that exciting? And if it's really exciting, I'm worried about you. Join me. So I went around trying to find out who won the battles. And I remember after digging, I found one of the British generals in England. I found one of his war reports. And he said, we won that battle. And it was a glorious victory. I remember the word glorious. And he said, we killed 1,000 Americans and lost 75 men, or whatever. I think it was 500 Americans, we lost 75. So I thought, oh my goodness, ladies and gentlemen, there it is. And then sometime later, I found the American General's report. They said the same thing. I killed 1,500 British troops. They were both claiming victory, which means one of the two of them is lying. I think they're both lying. Here's what I think happened. If you're a general in 1813 and you're fighting in rural Canada, population 15 people, right, at the time. I love Canada, but right, our 51st state. So, and you walk into an ambush and blow it and lose. Why write that you screwed up and lost the battle? You give it to your aide who puts it in a satchel, rides a horse for weeks to get to Halifax. They may get shot by Indians, eaten by a grizzly bear, or lost with no GPS, right? If they make it to Halifax, they wait for a creaky wooden ship and sail across the ocean. Then they wait for a carriage, and a year later they arrive in London. And you hand the report to Lord whoever, who looks at it and writes, "You're fired." He gives it back to you, and then you have to go back to the port in Portsmouth or Southampton, cross the Atlantic Ocean, find a horse, and how do you find a general? Do you text him? Call him? Address, postal service? You might find a general and hand you, a year after that, a letter saying you were fired 2 years ago. So I think what the generals did is they all wrote that I was a beast on the battlefield, slaying the enemy with my bare hands. And it was a great victory. I outthought everyone. And you write that down. And no one's going to know. No one's going to be wiser, because most of your soldiers are half literate, perhaps. They're farmers and clerks and blacksmiths who are going to live to be 30. They might die in a battle. And they're never going to write their memoir. And if they do write their memoir, who is history going to believe? Lord General whomever for Biddle, the carpenter, right? They're going to believe the general. And they're going to get away with this crap for 200 years, unless if a nerdy historian finds the truth. Right? So I think that you all saw the movie 300?
Yeah.
Yes.
About King Leonidas, right? And where all the Greek soldiers had a six-pack.
Yes.
And if you eat baklava, you don't have a six-pack. Okay, I mean, tell you that. And how could these men, do what they did? It's because they didn't do it. It was heroic, but it wasn't a movie. So I think they all lied. Anyways, there's some covers. I like them both. Don't love them, but like them. And for the War of 1812, we used the font that they used in 1812. It's a recent book, When Washington Burned. It was not about January 6th. It was about August 24th, 1814, when the British burned Washington, D.C. So I thought that would make a good story. I wanted to look at the first time a bunch of people attacked our capital and burned it and torched it and so forth and so on. So that's the book. This is with Georgetown. And I love my editor, Don Jacobs. We're friends, but I didn't like the cover. And I'm like, Don, no. I said, I've got the cover, this tank. Am I right?
Yeah.
Everybody? But I'm going to tell them you all said so. So I said, this is the cover. And he said to me, what did he say to me? Robert, when you're David McCullough, come on! I've got like the world's biggest insecurity complex when it comes to McCullough. Love it. I got a chance to work with him a few times. But anyway, so I think that would have made a better cover. However, it was not done concurrent, and it's not 100% accurate. And Georgetown is Georgetown, so it had to be 100% accurate. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm accurate. I cross my T's, dot my I's, and double check every primary source. But I thought it was close enough. But at any rate, this is a book, Escape, I wrote. That's the infamous Libby Prison in Richmond. Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy. Anybody been to Richmond? Great town. It was on Tobacco Row, down by the James River, which is now all these brick microbreweries, and a fun place to go out. It was one of the most horrific prisons in history, maybe second only to Andersonville, which was in Georgia, where they killed, 13,000 Union soldiers in about 13, 14 months, just slaughtered them. If you were a Northern soldier and you were captured by the South would torture and beat you and slaughter you. If you were a Southern soldier and captured by the North, you got food and a blanket and got medicine. So there's an insight into the people of the North and the people of the South through that particular example. But so that was 3 warehouses. It was a chandlery. A chandler is a ship's warehouse. So ships would pull up with the James River, which you can see on the back to the right. And they would sell what? Rope, tar, sails, lines, nails, whatever ships need, right? So it was a warehouse. The South had so many Union prisoners, they didn't know what to do with them all, so they put them in there. But that meant there was no facilities for going to the bathroom, no bunks. They were lying on the floor. It was so crowded that the men couldn't lie down without being piled up on top of one another. So what they did was they organized by unit, and they all would lie on their side spooning, like newlyweds, or like all of you guys do. Right? And they spooned, and every hour the Confederate guards would say, 3 o'clock and all's well. And when they did that, the commanding officer would get up and say, everyone, spoon right, 3, 2, 1. And a couple thousand men would go like this. Now, they were on hardwood floors that kept the side of their body from getting welts. They were darn near naked, and in the winter they had to keep warm. They wanted to find out who was alive, and that way you could at least lie down on the floor. These are the conditions. Anyways, I wrote the book because don't you love prison escape movies and books? Shawshank Redemption. Yeah. Anybody? Love it. Plus it had Morgan Freeman, right? Yes. Any Morgan Freeman fans? Love Morgan Freeman, the voice of God in the present. So it had Morgan Freeman in it. Great book, great movie. What about The Count of Monte Cristo? One of my all-time faves, right? Even though Clint Eastwood was in it, Escape from Alcatraz was well done, right? I mean, now, the only thing better than a prison break book or movie is when the prisoners were wrongly accused and they're the good guys. The only thing better than that is when they announce that the prison is escape-proof. Because as soon as they announce it, don't they jinx themselves? Well, this was escape-proof, and it was good guys, Union soldiers in it. And they were all being slaughtered. So I wanted to find out what was the largest prison break in American history, and ladies and gentlemen, this was it. February 9th, 1864. 109 Union officers tunneled out. Long before the Great Escape. Remember that? Yeah. Although most of them, all but 3 were recaptured by the Nazis and killed. This was way bigger, way earlier, and way more successful. So it was a remarkable thing. Plus it had 2 really cool characters. One was Lieutenant Rose. Thomas E. Rose. He was this big bear of a man from Pennsylvania, here Philadelphia, where I'm from, here, there. And Rose was quiet. He was not an orator. And even though he was a school teacher and then a principal and educated, he enlisted as a private, which nobody did, because he was so eager to fight against slavery. It was ideological for him. And in no time at all, he was a colonel. Not because of his speeches, but because he was a beast. Rose led from the front. There are countless stories from this man, and we have multiple accounts that all say the same thing. You know, back then they fought in lines, right? Everybody organized tight lines. The line would be being broken as the Confederates were punching a hole through it. Rose would pull his sword and pistol and charge into the wave of gray uniforms, slashing and punching and firing. And he would inspire his men. He was such a beast. Well, at the Battle of Chickamauga, he gets whacked over the head with the butt of a gun and knocked out. So they take him to this prison. Now, the horrible thing, if you could take a time machine back to 1863, everybody knew about this prison back then. And Union soldiers would sit around the campfire going, I hope I don't go to Libya. No. It was like the boogeyman, but we've forgotten about it. So it had that kind of, oh my gosh, if we get caught there. And if the warden was like Dracula, it was one of those kind of things. So the men are on a train being taken to Richmond and they're scared to death. And from the train station, you had to walk the main street, the long walk, through this gauntlet to get to that prison. And all the local Southerners would line up on either side and throw feces on the prisoners, and spit on them. If they had a gun, they'd arbitrarily shoot them, run up and stab them, hit them over the head with wood. You know, how you all doing? Just horrific. And the prisoners would be scared to death, walking in groups, trying to protect themselves. When the prisoners were walking, they said that they thought Rose, Colonel Rose, our hero, they thought he had lost his mind. because he was walking out front of everybody like a robot today. And someone would come up and hit him over the head with a 2x4, and he would just continue. Someone threw feces on, they didn't even rub it off. And they said, this guy's gone. What he was doing was counting the number of steps. He was memorizing every street corner. He knew where there was a lantern and where there wasn't, where was an opportunity for the shadows. He was already planning his escape.
Yes.
He gets into the prison. Warden Thomas Turner beats him, strips him, they abuse him and put him in on the floor. And Rose is going to get out. So on a stormy, rainy night, the ceiling was leaking. So the Confederates put up scaffolding to fix it. It started lightning and raining, so the Confederates ran away, leaving the scaffolding.
No?
So he goes to the window. They have metal bars, but Rose he's like the rock. He says, I might be able to break the metal bars. That's how strong this guy was. So he goes over and he's trying to do it pitch black as the storm's raging. A lightning bolt strikes and it illuminates the window and there's a face beside it. They both gasp. It turned out to be a major named Hamilton, Andrew G. Hamilton. He had the same idea. They shook hands and quietly snuck back to where they were sleeping on the floor, spooning. The next day, Rose looks out the window and he sees thousands of rats coming in and out of the sewer, which leads into the dungeon. And he says, if I can get into the dungeon, I can flow down in raw sewage. Nobody can expect that. Plop into the James River and run. So he goes down the next night, and there's a big padlocked door to get into the dungeon. Rose literally busts the door down.
Big bite.
I mean, he's like an NFL lineman or something. He goes into the basement, pitch black. It's ankle deep in urine and feces and overrun with rats. They're covering it. He's feeling his way along the wall and sewage and rats in the pitch black, and he bumps into somebody.
That's not.
They both gasp. It was Hamilton again.
No.
They had the exact same idea at the exact same time 2 nights in a row. So they shake hands and decide they're going to get out of here. Hamilton is the MacGyver who comes up with clever ways to escape. Rose is the one who digs the tunnel and motivates the men through his power. And they get out. It's the largest prison break in American history. So that I thought would be a good book. Then, the problem is if you go to Richmond today, there is no more living prison. It was torn down in the 1890s. Even though Lincoln visited it in April before his death. And Lincoln said, let's keep this as a monument to teach future generations about what, that's perfect timing, that patriotic music. Let us teach future generations. 7 years ago. Now we are engaged in a great battle, testing whether that compass. Anyway, so let's keep this prison and show future generations what we might do to one another. But they tore it down in the 1890s. So I've gone back there several times when I was writing the book, and here's the kicker. Today, where all those dead men were buried in mass graves, there's no more prison. There's a flood wall, and next to it, on top of what was the prison, is the Virginia Holocaust Museum.
Oh, wow.
Poetic? Talk about hallowing the ground, consecrating the ground. See the gavel bar? So here it gets better. I go in the Virginia Holocaust Museum, and I say, do you know what they're built on top of? No. And I told him. No one knew. This was one of the worst prisons in history, and the bones of Union soldiers. Cool, right? I mean, remarkable. So how poetic is that? Then I get the world's coolest phone call last spring from this guy.
Yeah.
Write your book. Like your book. I'd like to make it into a TV movie. And I'm like, who is this? Like your book, we're gonna be. I'm like, no, I mean, it's this. I'm naming all my friends. Is it Fred? Is it Dean? Is it Sean? Is it Steph? Who's punking me? I'm gonna hang up. Don't hang up. It was Morgan Freeman's aide. It says, Morgan Freeman loves your book and wants to make it into a movie. And I'm like, are you serious? They're like, yeah. And I said, well, let me think about it. Yes. Do you want a contract? No. Do you have terms? No. So Morgan Freeman made it into a 1-hour show. And here we are on set. And we went to a nearby place called Historic Tredegar. Anybody in Richmond along the river? If you're there, go to it. It was part of a prison complex. They really, really were good about this. In fact, Morgan Freeman loves history and science. You know, he donates to a lot of good causes, human rights, women's rights causes, but he does it anonymously. I mean, he's one of those, like Jamie Lee Curtis, anyone know her? She pays for so much stuff about the Holocaust, but does it privately, does it quietly. They're amazing people. They even contacted me and said, listen, send us pictures of what Rose looked like. And they cast an actor that's big and dashing with weird. And at one point, he was able to get a white nightshirt, and they had the guy in an untucked white nightshirt. Everything. They would call and say, what was the weather like? And I was going, oh my gosh. You know, they really cared about it. So it aired on the History Channel September. Anybody see it? Hey! There's 6 of you. All right, to the 6 of you. Did you like it? Okay, I'm going to sit with you behind me. So it's good. So check it out. It's on the History Channel. It's about Libby prison. They did a great job with it. So that was a lot of fun. That's Colonel Rose's diary. I found his diary, and there's even bloodstains throughout the diary. So, which makes it even cooler. There he is, the big dude. Anyways, the ghost ship. So this is another book. Now the cover, I've always heard that there was this ship during the Revolutionary War where thousands of Americans died in the most horrific way. It was like a concentration camp, and I say that with all due respect, having written on the Holocaust. So I contacted about 24 historians around the country, big people. You got to be careful because someone will steal your work, your idea. So I called people I knew. No one knew anything about it. The only one that did was Gordon Wood. Anybody heard of Gordon Wood, the eminent professor at Brown? I brought him to Lynn a couple of years ago. I brought him to the Society of the Florists. Gordon is like the world's preeminent revolutionary historian. Obama gave him the presidential medal. It's like your first day in your PhD program. They say, read Gordon Wood, then we'll have class. Okay, so Gordon said, yeah, he told me about this. He said, but Robert, there's not enough for a book. There's enough for an article. So I'm thinking, game on. So what I did was I used and the ship no longer exists. So there's no ship. And I remember the publisher said, what you don't see is sometimes scarier than what you see. So they just made this foreboding, ominous storm in the seas, and you don't know what the ship looks like. And doesn't your mind conjure something better than, yeah, so they said that to me, I'm like, okay, let's go with that. So anyway, so I used a very fancy research technique I picked up during my PhD program, which is why I spent $100,000 getting a PhD. I sent boxes of dark chocolate banknotes to librarians and archivists all up and down the eastern seaboard. I knew that there were young sailors from New England who died by the thousands on this ship. So I found every coastal community, Providence, New Bedford, that had been around during the Revolution and had a lot of sailors, right? So I found archivists and librarians. Give it up for our librarians, right? Thank you. Where are they? Okay. And I sent them boxes of dark chocolate banknotes. And I said, you might be sitting on one of the biggest stories of the Revolution. The bloodiest event of the Revolution. Are you ready for your statistic of the day, everybody? Everybody ready? Twice as many Americans died on this one ghost ship than died in combat during the entirety of the Revolutionary War. Do y'all hear that? Twice as many died on this one ghost ship than died in combat during the entirety of the Revolutionary War. And I'll be damned, we have a copy of it over here. Thank you, Stacy. Yeah, crazy, right? And remember, the Revolutionary War started in April of 1775 at Lexington and Concord, lasted 1783. Next month is the 250th anniversary of the start of the war. So I told these librarians and archivists, I think you might be sitting on one of the biggest stories in the whole revolution. And here's a box of dark chocolate banknotes for your reference. So one, they remembered me, because a lot of professors are condescending and snotty, right? Present company excluded. But then you bait them, don't you? And then every time whenever I call a museum or this battlefield around the country, everybody's like, Robert, how you doing? I'm like, I'll send you a box of dark chocolate banknotes. So they know who you are. It's not my work, it's my charity. Okay? So I sent them out, and nothing. So I sent a second round with more information. And shortly after that, I get a phone call from the Providence, Rhode Island Public Library. And the librarian says he was sitting down I said, yeah. She says, in the basement of our library, sitting on top of a shelf, is a 157-ish page diary from a 13-year-old boy named Christopher Hawkins who survived the ghost ship. It's been down here for 200 years. I'm like, okay, I'm mailing you more dark chocolate magnets, and I'm on my way. Now, I got Christopher Hawkins' diary, which is beautifully written, 13-year-old who survived. But what he does is he told us the names of all the other boys that lived. There was one named Ebenezer Fox. And Christopher told us the day that he escaped and what town it was from. So if it was New Bedford and it was June 1, 1780, whatever, I don't remember the date, I would go to the New Bedford archives for that week and look at the old newspapers on the reel to reel and everything and microfiche. And sure enough, there's a story. It says, we all remember little Ebenezer Fox. On Tuesday, a naked skeleton crawled into town. It was young Ebenezer. He was on the ghost ship. And everybody else in town was slaughtered on the ship. So what it was, the British had so many prisoners after attacking us in New York City in the Battle of Long Island. Okay. And, they needed a prison, and they used a ship. The ship was said to be cursed, so they hulked the ship. If you hulk a ship, you take the sails, rudder, wheelhouse, mast, you take everything off, so it looks like a coffin. They put 1,000 Americans in it, they boarded up the portholes and the hatches, and all 1,000 died. So the British got a devilish idea. Why don't we make this a weapon of psychological terror? And they had broadsides like a one-page poster that you tack on a pub door or a tavern door. Said, if you pick up arms against us, and if you get caught, you're going to the ghost ship. There's only one way off, horizontal. And they proceeded to slaughter countless thousands of Americans on the ship. So anyway, so wow, now I found a diary, so I was able to write the ship. There's Christopher's diary. So I took a picture of it. You can't use flash, and you have to put white gloves on when you go to these archives. And you're not allowed to bring a book bag or pens. You can bring two number 2 pencils and an 8x11 notepad. So it's still old school because God bless if somebody marks it up, right? You can't just say, I want the Declaration of Independence in my office. Oh, I guess you didn't read that yet. So you can't just say that. These things need to be under bulletproof glass, hermetically sealed, temperature controlled. Has anybody been to the Beinecke Rare Books Library at Yale? Please tell me, okay, coolest place ever?
Yes.
I taught at Yale. Only so many people are allowed in there at a time because your breath, is humidity and heat. It's amazing. Anybody been to the Trinity College Dublin Library? Yeah, cool, right? I mean, you're like, oh. So, anyway, I wrote the book, and I'm on the foundation board for the Truman Library because Harry's my hero. And a couple of years ago, the director of the Truman Library said, Robert, we're going to start a history happy hour. We're going to bring local microbreweries, food trucks, and Friday at 4 or 5 o'clock, we want you to come out and tell us funny stories about history in Truman. I'm like, oh, I can do that. I said, I can do that. Any chorus line fans? My sister was a chorus line, so was my mother. Anyway, so I saw it like 73 times. I could actually do the dance, but I don't. So I'm like, yeah, cool, I'll come out for happy hour. Truman, food trucks, happy hour history, come in. So he calls me and he says, Robert, there's this really tall, really old guy who's, ever since we announced this, he calls us every day wanting your contact information. And the director of the library says, we're not going to give it out, we think he's crazy. And I'm like, okay, thanks, don't give it out. And like a week or two before I go, I called and I said, listen, I'm going to come a day or two early so I can go down in the archives and work for a day or two. Right? I'm not going to miss the opportunity to do some research. Can you assign your archives? Yeah. But Robert, the guy, keeps calling every day. We've got good. So I go out there, and like Friday morning at 8 or 9, I'm in the archives. As soon as it opens up, the director comes down with a long face and goes, Robert, guess who's standing here waiting for 5 o'clock? The crazy man. And he goes, I'm going to call the police and have him taken away. And I said, no, I'll go see him. Don't worry. So I walk up and there's this guy with a name tag saying Woody. He sees me and he starts bawling. I'm like, what's wrong? It's the great-great-great-great-grandson of Christopher Hawkins, the 13-year-old. It's Woody Hawkins. He's the great-great-great-great-grandson of the guy who's original. And he said, and he's carrying a satchel like an Indiana Jones satchel, and it's filled with 200-some-year-old letters. He said, my dad gave me this because his dad gave it to him, because his dad gave it to him, and our great-great-great-great-whatever grandfather, we was a hero. We don't know what to do with it. And he said, somebody called me, and on page 103, 196, 212, 313, it's just Christopher Hawkins. So he just bawled and bawled. I gave him a big hug. And I contacted the National Archives and the Truman Presidential Library, and we digitized everything. We put everything in the National Archives and in Mar-a-Lago. He made copies and gave them the copies. I met with his grandkids and told them about their so no one would hear him. They stripped, and William went first and snuck through the hole and plopped into the water. Christopher plopped in. William was down to 60 pounds and drowned immediately. He underestimated how we did. A lot of Holocaust survivors die in the days after the Holocaust. So Christopher spent 1 week hiding by day and running by night.
Wow.
He finally can go no farther. He's naked, he's starving, he's a skeleton. He sees a little boy carrying farm produce up to the house, the farm. So he approaches the boy drops and runs into the house screaming. The mother comes out, brings him into the house, and takes a look at him. She bathes him, cleans him, feeds him. She says, oh my God, were you on the ghost ship? He says, yes. She's going to report him. She says, my husband just died on the ghost ship. So she nursed him back to health, sent him back to Rhode Island. Christopher was such a patriot, which meant he didn't wear the pelvis. So we're a patriot, which means he re-enlisted and fought the rest of the war and lived through it and told the story. So it was a great meeting. You could see Woody's eyes are all red because he cried. So then after that, I got a really cool phone call. Anybody like National Geographic?
Oh, yeah.
Hello. What about the National Geographic TV channel, right? Anybody watch this super cool series called Drain the Oceans? Yeah, it's really cool. So watch their episode on New York City. I wrote it. So what it is if you drain like the waters off of Rhodes or Athens or whatever, what are you going to find? If you drain the river ocean, what are you going to find? If you drain the Mississippi, what are you going to find? If you drain the Gulf of America, what are you going to find? Right? I don't know what you drain, right? You can find something from the American-Mexican War, or the American-Spanish War, or the American War of the 40s, also known as World War II, right? So, what are you going to find? So, the ghost ship was in Brooklyn. Y'all know where the Naval Yard, right? That's where it was, Walkabout Bay, 100 yards off. So they asked me to write an episode about it. The problem is there's no more ghost ship. So they used their computer graphics nerds, and we recreated the ship through CGI. So after 200-some years, the ship came back to life through CGI. It was built in 1737. I had all the specs. I knew how many decks, I knew how many masts, I knew how many cannons. There were 400 men on board. And all the prisoners that lived, like Christopher and Ebenezer Fox, they wrote about the ship. So we recreated it, went through several iterations. The first draft, it was a beautiful warship. I said, no. Everybody said it had turned black from the wood rotting. So we worked, and there it is. We brought the ghost ship back. So after 200-some years, we brought the ship back. Anybody been to Brooklyn? Look at everybody. Anybody been to Fort Greene Park? Yes. You see that obelisk, which is 100 feet high. That's the lone monument to this ship. It's called the Prison Ship Martyrs Monument. And I've been there countless times to get the pizza and do my research. And nobody knows what that monument is for. In fact, it's all falling apart. You see the crypt next to it?
Yeah, I missed.
I'm like, what the hell is that? It took me 2 days to get access to Brooklyn's officials. They couldn't find anybody that had a key to it. Nobody knew what was there. We opened it up. The bones of 7,000 of those sailors. And guess who organized putting them there? Walt Whitman.
Right.
Super cool. Yeah, super cool, right? So it had been forgotten to history. This is the new book, Rebels at the Gates. It comes out in 1 month. This is, if you have to leave, feel free to leave. This is, so Grant has Petersburg and Richmond surrounded. right? It's the end of the war. And Grant's like a big bull with a bone. And Lee was scared to death of Grant. They all did. Because Grant would never stop. Grant was tough. Underappreciated, I should say. So Grant has it surrounded. He takes over 100,000 men off every fort. He takes thousands of cannons. They're just pummeling. So it's not if, but when Petersburg and Richmond falls. Lee's trapped inside. The Army of Northern Virginia is trapped inside. Jefferson Davis is trapped inside. So at the end of the war, Lee hatches a plan. They get what used to be Stonewall Jackson's army. He was the greatest general of that time. And they give it to this grumpy old Confederate named Jubal Anderson Early, who I swear to God looks like Yosemite Sam. It's like perfect casting. I'm like, oh, of course it is, right? And they sneak out of Richmond at 3 in the morning. And under cover of darkness, they race the whole way up the Shenandoah Valley, living off the land. It's rich agriculture. And they attack Washington, D.C. And D.C. doesn't have a garrison. Fort Stevens on the northwest entrance. Grant took all the men and cannons off to end the war. And Jubal Early rides up to Washington, D.C. He's sitting on his horse. He gets his field glasses, and he looks at the fort. He sees the unfinished dome of the Capitol. And he smiles and announces to his senior staff on horseback, I'm not smiling because of what I see. I'm smiling because of what I don't see. There's no army. The city is ours. They were going to burn it, kill Lincoln, and then that would be the end of the war, right? There's an election that fall. The anti-slavery party would lose. The pro-slavers would win and destroy the country from within. The problem was Early turns around at dawn, and his army is stretched out for about 5 miles on the road behind him, vomiting, south asleep, and under the trees. 2 days earlier, they looted Union storehouses that contained alcohol, and the Southerners drank for 48 hours straight. How do y'all know? They had a world-class pickle. And Early tries to rouse his men riding up and down during the rebel yell, and everybody's vomiting or sound asleep. So he says, I'll wait till the next morning. Well, obviously everybody sees the Confederate army, plus they were so dumb, instead of being quiet, they ran around going, yippee-ki-yay, shooting their guns, harassing people and burning houses. So everybody knew they were there. It's called natural selection. So they sent a telegraph to Grant, who gets divisions from the 6th Corps and the 19th Corps. 6th Corps was our most badass army. He puts them on the fastest steamers. They race up the Potomac at night. They arrive in D.C. the next morning. As the Confederates are marching to Fort Stevens, the Unions march into Fort Stevens. They meet at the exact same moment. You can't script it. And the Union annihilates the Confederate army and saves the capital. So pretty cool, right? That's what it looked like back then. I went there today. There's 2 cannons. You can see it's earthworks. It's trenches and so forth. That's what it looks like today. You see this rock up here? Lincoln was so panicked that when word that the Confederates were there, he empties out the hospitals. He calls it the Invalid Corps. He gets one-armed, one-legged, one-eyed veterans, puts them in wagons, hands them a musket and 5 rounds, and they all go up to the walls. He's got like 2,000 one-armed, one-eyed, one-legged, and they can't, to take on the Confederate army. And Lincoln climbs up on top of the thing to see the Confederates and rouse the men. A shot fires out. He's standing next to a surgeon. The bullet hits a rock, ricochets into the surgeon. It misses Lincoln by about a foot. Yeah, oh my golly. So that's the mark. That's me on the left standing beside where Lincoln got shot, and of course I didn't comb my hair. On the right, that's the smallest cemetery in the country. There's 41 little white markers about the size of a book in concentric circles. Those are the Union soldiers that paid the ultimate sacrifice to save the Capitol. And I've been there several times. I've asked, there's a police substation, fast food, like a 7-Eleven, cheap apartments, and nobody knows what's there. I mean, we've forgotten it. And every time I go, I stop everybody out for a walk on the way to work. Do you know what's here? And they look at me like I'm crazy. So anyways, that's where they were buried. Nazi Titanic, I'll skip that because of the time. Cool thing about, like, this is this is the ship where thousands and thousands of Holocaust survivors died as the war peace was being signed. Really cool. I got a phone call from the Science and Discovery channels. They wanted me to write an episode about my book. So I said, yeah. And they liked it, so they had me write about 15 TV shows about World War II, the Nazis. Really cool. So there we are on the top, going on site, digging up Nazi ruins. Those of you that joined me last June, anybody been to the British Channel, English Channel Islands? Remember Guernsey? You saw this in Rotterdam, all the Nazi, so we went on, so it's really cool because of a book, I get to go around and I get to play in the dirt, which is what I did when I was 4. Right? I'm gonna get paid this time. This is the National Archives. I am not a conspiracy theorist, I'm the opposite. I won't put anything down if I can't find a corroborating source. But every time I go there, there's multiple layers underground. You all remember Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark? When they got a forklift and they took the Ark in cell basement 7, row L24, right? Every time I go there, I walk up and down going, what the hell's still in here? We haven't read yet, right? Because who knows? Who knows? The Nazi stuff, I found 2 letters, one from a British major named Noel Till, and one from a British general named Mills Roberts of the 6th Commando. And they both said that the worst event of the war occurred in the Baltic Sea when thousands of Holocaust survivors died as we were signing the spread. And I went, what? I read these letters. I'm like, that never happened. So I called the Holocaust Museum in Washington, the World War II Museum in New Orleans, I recommend it both to. Called the Yad Vashem, called the Imperial War Museum in England. I called all the top dogs, and everybody said it didn't happen. Like, man, I got 2 letters here. Something happened. So what I did was, I figured I'm going to solve it myself. So, if you had a relative in World War II, you can contact the Pentagon or your member of Congress, and they'll follow your uncle or whatever through the war, every battle he was in, what unit, blah, 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 casualty counts. So I did that for Major Till and General Mills Roberts. And there's the, related to the Battle of the Bulge, related to D-Day, related to the invasion of Sicily, yada, yada, yada. There's all the records until the last end of the war, and there's no records read them. I'm like, what's the likelihood? So I thought, well, maybe they're classified. Maybe that's why the letters seem real, but nobody in the world knows about it. So I started calling the archives in England, and they literally would hang up on me. And one time I remember I called and said, listen, I think you're sitting on one of the biggest stories of World War II and the Holocaust. Click. I called back and said, don't hang up. I'm going to mail you a book of mine that won a national book award. Now, I'm not a quack. I said, listen to me, hear me out. And I explained what I found, and he said, we don't have it. And I remember what I said to him. I said, at least lie, put the phone down for 2 hours and say, we looked, I couldn't find it. And then he hung up. So I'm going crazy. Thinking that I'm a crazy man, and I couldn't get anybody to believe me. So we're at Normandy, D-Day, years ago. Several of you have cruised with me to Normandy. And I'm on the beach, and I meet an Academy Award-winning filmmaker named Deborah Oppenheimer. She made the movie on the Kinder Transport. I brought it to the Jewish Film Festival. I bring her to Lynn every year. An amazing woman. She's smart, attractive, accomplished, friends with Samuel L. Jackson, Academy Award, friends with Judi Dench, Sir Attenborough. Prince Charles, King Charles. So
that's good.
I meet her there, and it turns out I know her mom and dad. Eric and Gloria lived with Boca. And just everybody does. It's a rule. Everybody has a bubby and Boca. It's a rule. It's a rule. You can't get a driver's license if you don't. Excuse me, do you have a bubby and Boca? Okay. Sit still. So, anyways, their parents just passed, but I knew her parents. I'm like, holy smokes, what a small world. She said, they love you, boys, tell me what you're working on. And I told her this crazy story, and I can't get access to the classified documents in England. Now, I'm just a professor in a little school in Boca. I can't get access. She says, I know Prince Charles and Judy. 2 days later, they called me, and they said, Debbie called. She said, you're her new bro, and we're supposed to believe you that you found something amazing. So what can we do for you? And I wanted to say, okay, write this down. This is what I think happened. This is where I think it is, because I spend my life in archives. Exciting social life. Weekends. So 2 days later, their top archivist calls me and said, we found it. It was a box the size of that podium with almost 800 pages of classified documents. On the side of the box, it said, "Top secret, not to be opened for 100 years until 2045. Isn't that Nicolas Cage in National Treasure? I mean, right? And I'm like, they really do this? And inside was the story of the Nazi Titanic. And they said, "What would you like?" And I'm the type of person, if I go to dinner and they bring me the wrong meal, I just eat it. I don't complain about anything. But I thought, well, this is the World Series and it's the ninth inning. So I said, "I want complete and unfettered access. Only me. When I'm done with it, you can release it." They went, "Okay." I'm like, "Did you say okay?" So that's how I wrote the book. So the fun thing is going to literary festivals and book talks. There's judging. They have, it has to be referee or peer review, right? But you get into a book festival and do book signings, and it's great. Everybody comes up to buy your book. This guy here is going to buy the ghost ship. So that's fun. It's like talking about your grandkids, right, everyone? Me too. So here's a couple fun things. So this is me at the Gaithersburg, Maryland Book Festival. I'm a professor, so I can't believe anybody even shows up.
No.
When you see my girlfriend, tell her that this room is full. Somebody's going to show up. Like they say, it's sold out. So they asked me to do publicity, so we did a media campaign. This is me at Grant's headquarters during the siege that I told you about. I went and helped them redo it, and corrected all the signage. This is a book festival. This is at NPR while it still exists, right? So you can see they're underfunded. Doing a radio interview about your book, that's fun stuff. This is American History TV. This was cool. It was at the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia. Anybody been? It's great, isn't it? Great. It's right near Constitution Center. It's magnificent. They've done a wonderful job. So I've gone there a couple times to help them with their exhibits. So that's fun. They say, "Okay, we're going to film you for an hour. Get up and talk about your book and history." I'm like, "Okay."
What was that?
This was at Harvard, which was really cool. This was on my book tour about the Nazi Titanic. And I used that photo because I'm not sure if it was during this time, during the Q&A, not someone from Harvard, but someone who stood up and told me the Holocaust never happened. This was 2016. It's the first time in public somebody said the Holocaust never happened. Now I hear it every Tuesday, and when I'm getting gas, right, from someone with a red baseball cap. Every week. F you, the Holocaust never happened. Every week. But I couldn't believe it. And I'm thinking, we're at Harvard. This class C-SPAN. Oh no. Anyways, I did a 30-city book tour, and I heard it 6 more times. Stacy, you've heard this story. I heard it 7 times on my book tour. And I think the reason why is the book was called The Nazi Titanic. So I think these Neanderthals who don't think it happened, I thought I was going to talk about Hitler or something, right? So subsequently, I hear it all the time. So this is at the Smithsonian. This was one of my favorites. Twice a year, the Smithsonian has me do a program. I'm out of my skin. This morning, I got a call. The anniversary's coming up in October. They want me to keynote the anniversary of it. And I'm like, "Do you have the right phone number?"
No.
And I said, "Would you?" And I'm like, "Yes." So anyways, that's cool. So we get to go there. I'm doing 2 or 3 programs for them over the next 3 months on Zoom. If you're interested, all about hidden history. This is at the Library of Congress. Anybody been to the Library of Congress? Don't you get smarter by walking in it? It's osmosis. I hang out there just so I'm not, a Neanderthal, which I'm close to. And when I have to go there to do my research, now, I don't like to dress up. And sometimes in my office when I'm writing, I actually wear shorts. I say, "Look, today's a writing day." I write better if I don't make a pig. But whenever I go there, I wear a suit, just because it makes you smarter. So, and I love going to the Library of Congress to do my work. Here's one of the funnest things of being an author. These are pictures that either I took or somebody sent. They found my book at a bookstore somewhere. And I'm like, "Look, kids, my book, Dad's book." And they're like, "Can we get gelato?" Look. Okay, we can get gelato. This was at a bookstore. I thought this was cool. And this, I was out at a resort. I can't remember where it was. It might have been the Dominican Republic or someplace. I'm going to the pool at someone's party, and they had my book sitting there. Now, it was not straight. I straightened it and took a picture. I'm like, is this guy stalking me or something? So I'm like, yeah, I'm reading my book. This a friend of mine was reading it, and this a friend of mine found it at the beach. So it's cool. So if you ever find it in the bookstore, send me a picture, right? I don't need sleep. Last thing in closing, I'll say, watch your local PBS, WXEL, and BOCOP. There's a great program on authors, and the program's always threatening to be closed. And Anne's a friend, she lets me do a couple programs a year. This is Josh Aronson, a dear friend of mine. Bringing the Lynn, if anybody's met him. Josh made a movie on Israel's first orchestra, Orchestra of Exiles. He's nominated twice for the Academy. He's super cool. He's a concert pianist. He's a polymath. He's remarkable. So a couple of years ago, my book and his movie won the National Jewish Council Award. So they sent us all around the country. We have to show his movie and talk about it, and me to read excerpts from my book and talk about it.
What?
And I remember this cute. The first day, he gets up and talks about his movie. I'm sitting in the audience. I have like a serious bro crush. I'm like, this guy's amazing. Gotta be a friend. And I'm like, okay, note to self, as soon as I'm free, go up and befriend this guy. Then I have to go up and talk. And I'm looking out, and as soon as it's over, he's thinking the same thing. And I jump off the stage, he does, we have a bromance. I'm like, hey, my brother. I'm like, drinks? He's like, dinner and drinks. I'm like, okay. So we get to travel around the country talking about our things, so you can make good friends while writing books. And I'll just skip that. Okay, everybody, thanks for coming out.